Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Today, we're talking watches, and everything is for sale. Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for the price of any watch you see in this episode. And we always want to build up inventory, in and out. That's how the watch industry is. We will buy your entire collection. No upper limit on value paid. We pay cash, we pay fast, we make the process easy. Or if you want to trade up to a new flame, we can often offer a better value on a trade than on an outright sale. So to buy, trade, or sell, reach out to me personally. I'm Tim Mosso, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. All right, now we're talking about my longtime Omega Speedmaster heartthrob. I've never been a space fanatic or a NASA memorabilia collector, and I never fell in love with the actual Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch. But in 2014, I saw this and I was smitten. This is the gray side of the moon, the follow-up to the landmark 2013 dark side of the moon. The gray side turned out to be a more interesting watch in almost every way. First, let's start with the obvious. The freaking dial is made of platinum. Don't believe me? Let's take a look. As you can see at center, Omega actually put, let's fire up the chronograph, PT 950 at the dial center. So, like the old Rolex Yachtmasters with the platinum dial, this is a media blasted solid platinum dial on which white gold indices and hands, which have been smoked for contrast, are placed. You can see it's a triple register chronograph with a clean twin register dial, because you've got your seconds at center for the chronograph. If you look carefully though, there's superimposed coaxial chronograph hour and minute hands over at 3 o'clock, so you get to see both of them as the time progresses. You can also adjust the hour hand independently, even moving the date forward and backwards as you travel east or west across the international date line. Note the chronograph's still running, the watch still ticking, we haven't displaced the minute hand. The watch also features an upgrade on the lume of the dark side, as now everything from the crown cap to the tachymeter is fully luminescent on the gray side. Now it's a large watch, but it doesn't wear that way. Okay, don't let me scare you, but it is 44.25 millimeters in diameter. That said, it's only about 50 millimeters from lug to lug, and ceramic, if you're new to this material, it's not just super scratch resistant, it's also really light. So when you wear the watch on the wrist, it feels like it's made of titanium. It's large, it's thick, but it's not particularly broad, and you can see that the watch doesn't really come to the edge of my wrist on either side. I'd recommend it for wrists as small as 15 centimeters circumference because of the lightness and the short lug-to-lug span. Now there's a lot to love here, including the extent of the finishing. Omega executed the polish and the satin on this case as though it were made of metal, right down to the blindingly mirrored bevel that runs end to end. You can also see it on the underside of the bezel here, and then on the crown as well as chronograph pushers, but the most impressive part of the watch might be the buckle. Now, a lot of companies that will sell you a ceramic watch will also give you some sort of PVD metal buckle, but Swatch Group's technical might is such that they can construct a scratch-resistant, but also shatter-resistant and reliable full ceramic pin buckle. So the part underneath the wrist that often goes desk diving and gets scratched, you know how it is when you're at your desk, you're moving your arm back and forth, and this is scraping. Well, no more scratches because this long, vulnerable part is now resilient. Okay, so I like my sports watches, and I'm on a sports watch kick, so let's jump to what might be the best dive watch of 2022, still going strong in 2023. This is the Pioneer Moser should have made from the beginning. 40 millimeters, titanium, only 11.7 millimeters thick, feather light, full bracelet, fume dial, no date, titanium bezel insert, and if you thought the lume was impressive on the Omega, take a look at this. As you can see, that titanium insert has been filled with Luminova. Listen how loud that bezel detent is. One of the chunkiest I've ever heard. And look carefully on the dial. You can see that the indices are actually three-dimensional solid blocks of lume known as globalite. It's a ceramic-based material that Moser has been cultivating and working into its watch designs. You can see that same globalite is actually stacked on top of the hands at center, and there's a little flange outboard of the hour indices. You can see that better in the light, but that's where those outer luminescent indices are on the dial. You can see that flange outboard, fume of funky blue. Fume means smoked, so light at the center, dark at the edge with a metallic sunburst finish. We have here a Brogioli built incremental slider. You can see that there's a rack and a lock, and so we have this ability to make fine-tuning changes. The watch is 120 meters water resistance. You better believe it's good to swim. Moser teaching Rolex a lesson here. A paucity of printing. We don't need to read a tome on the dial. H. Moser and C. out of Schaffhausen. The smaller of the two manufacturers in Schaffhausen, and easily the more exclusive. You can also see that unlike IWC, Moser sports watches have not succumbed to elephantitis. Their watches are actually getting smaller, which is what I appreciate here. This watch is now comparable to a Rolex Submariner in fit on the wrist, and it's actually even a little bit thinner. Taking a look at the case back, you can see automatic winding. It uses a magic lever bidirectional winding system. This is the HMC 200. It's also nicely braced against shocks. It's got a full balance bridge and a free sprung recessed bolt balance. 3-day power reserve, ceramic rotor bearings for high efficiency, minimal service needs, and then you have their distinctive 3/4 style plate. Obviously it's split, you can see that for maintenance, but it looks like a 3/4 plate the way it visually reads, and you have these lovely Moser specific double crested Côte de Genève. It is a 100-piece limited edition. These are very hard to come by, so when one pops up, it's always a great opportunity for someone who wants to get into horlogerie from a company that has rock solid financial protection from a large group. MELB owns Moser. It's run by the Meilhan family, famously of Audemars Piguet, latterly of Moser since 2012, really redeveloping Moser into a company that realizes all of its original potential. So here we have a company that's run by hard-nosed businessmen, not a bunch of dreamers, and the product has really benefited from that, as has the stability of the company, the availability of parts and service, and yes, even innovation. Normally, you don't think that emotional watch innovation would be linked to hard-nosed businessmen. I don't want to scare you away there. The Meilhans have an incredible taste for design. This is the Streamliner Perpetual calendar. Now, this came out in 2021. It was the third of the Streamliner models after the flyback chrono and the center second. Now, it's 42.3 millimeters, but it's only 13.4 millimeters thick, so it actually wears more like the Streamliner center second than it does the flyback. The dial is again, if you may, here dark at the center, or I should say dark at the edge, light at the center, but a sort of gray, and it's a gray or an ardoise. And then we have those blocks of lume that we saw just a moment ago. Let's take a quick look. This is the Streamliner QP. Notice how they made the date disc luminescent here. A thoughtful little refinement in a watch that's absolutely packed with them. Now, still 120 meters water resistant. Here we have a screw down crown, and the Streamliner's derivative of nothing. Instead of being a Nautilus or a Royal Oak knockoff like almost every other watch in this genre, they went a different direction. They drew on the design language of 1930s Streamliner trains. And if you look that up, you're going to find that they really did hew closely to the source material, but because they're not drawing specifically from a watch, there's an elegance, there's a modernity, there's even a little bit of a sort of retro-futurism about it that's hard to place. The bracelet maybe has a little bit of Ebel Sport Wave from the late 70s or Omega Speed Sonic Lobster bracelet. The case maybe a little bit of Chronora's Star. You can tell that there is a 70s inspiration alongside the locomotive muse, but it's difficult to place because, again, unlike most watches in this genre, it's not trying to be a cheaper Royal Oak or Nautilus. It's very much a Streamliner. Now, taking a look at the bracelet, you can see it is almost organic fluid, like the back of some sort of aquatic annelid or crustacean. Taking a quick look in profile, you can see a combination of polish and satin and a seamless junction. There's no daylight showing between these links. Flip it all over, and you can see we've got a movement to match. Manual wind. This is reference 812, 2 barrels, rated at 7 days. In fact, it'll run for almost 9. Full balance bridge, free sprung, that you know. Overcoil hairspring, solid gold escapement for reduced lubrication and drag. You can see 2 barrels set in gold and chaton. We have blackened bridges with double-crested Côte de Genève. All screw heads are black polished here, and the entire escapement, balance, hairspring assembly lifts out as one piece so that the watch can be quickly serviced and returned to you from any of Moser's regional service affiliates. And that's another advantage to having a watch from a company run by actual businessmen. They realize that you need to be able to service locally and get watches back from service quickly. Now we will demonstrate how this system works. We have a bi-directional calendar. You can turn it in both directions. Now wait until that seconds hand passes. Let's move the hour hand out of the way here. That little index, 12 hours corresponding to 12 months. That's how the perpetual calendar system works here. So you can see I'm able to jump that little index at center, forward, and back, as I jump between October and November, the 10th and the 11th. And you can see how that works, bi-directional, seamless, easy to set. And you could tell just how discreet Moser is about its branding. You see the watch, you see the dial, you know what it is. There's branding here, but it's super subtle. Let me try to capture it. At the right angle, you can see that there is a clear lacquer on the dial that has the Moser logo. Again, not necessary. Their design DNA is so strong, you already know who made this. There's also a power reserve indicator up here at about 10 o'clock on the dial, so you can track your power reserve. And then on the reverse side, if you're wondering, where's the leap year indicator? It's on the back. Andreas Streller, the great independent watchmaker and prototypist, created this movement for Moser, and he decided that you don't need to know the leap year phase full time, so he put the indicator on the back, and you can adjust it with a little pusher adjuster. A really cool watch. As you can see, we have jewels set in golden chaton, a la Moser pocket watches of the 19th century. Another 19th century pocket watch element that's included is this swan's neck style click spring. A really good looking watch, and fairly easy to wear. You wouldn't think a 42 Plus would be this compact, but a combination of the shape of the case, the curve of the bracelet, and the relative lack of thickness means it's really agreeable, even on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference, and I rarely make that recommendation for a 42 Plus watch. You can even see it'll fit underneath the cuff, and of course, being a Moser, it has those wonderful case flank evacuations, so you have those hollows all the way around with a contrasting finish. In 2018, Audemars Piguet celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Royal Oak Offshore. The original Royal Oak Offshore was created in 1993 by young designer Emmanuel Guet, second-generation watch designer. His father had designed for many during the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and this is Guet's masterpiece. Ironically, Gerald Genta, creator of the original Royal Oak, hated it. He said it was a bastardization of his design, but then again, the revolutionary always becomes the establishment. Guet's design was a more modern, larger, and more durable Royal Oak, explicitly intended for things like swimming and activities, onshore and off, hence the name Offshore. Now, this is a special edition that came out in 2018, recreating the original 1993 reference 25721. So 42 millimeters in steel here. You can see it has a number of elements from the early watch, including nitrile covers on the crown and pushers, the petite tapisserie dial that was part of the original design, along with the baton hands and the so-called blob-style indices. Now, it doesn't feature the JLC movement inside like the original did. This is a combination of AP's own base caliber 3126 with a Dubois de Praz 3840 vertical clutch chronograph module, but externally the watch looks very much like the original timepiece. The bracelet is a little bit more solid, as the very earliest Royal Oak Offshores actually featured a double deployant stamped clasp. Here we have a much more robust arrangement. The earliest watches also had screws on both sides of the bracelet. Here we have screws on one side. You don't need to counter torque with 2 screws to size your watch, which is a substantial upgrade. The watch is also more durable internally because of the construction of the 3126 base movement. It's got a longer power reserve with 50 to 55 hours. Remember, the original JLC was only good for 38. So you get a lot of upgrades in this newer variant, albeit with the earliest design, which is a nice and agreeable combination because, among other things, modern Royal Oak dials are stamped, whereas this pantograph cut petite tapisserie is artisanally crafted. So the watch wears easily for something so big. I will say it wears more like a 44 than a 42, so keep that in mind. But if your wrist is my size or larger, so 16 centimeters circumference or up, you're going to find this is an easy watch to wear. It's also 100 meters water resistant, which was, in the early 90s, a welcome respite from the barely water resistant Royal Oaks that were rated at a maximum of 50 meters back then. 100 is just fine for swimming. We've got plenty of lume. The originals would have featured tritium, but some things don't need to be revived. Being able to see your watch in the dark, especially with a sports watch, is welcome. Hacking seconds, quick set date, and because the DD module is a vertical clutch, you can start the chronograph without any jump or stagger. It's very smooth and seamless. Okay, this is a cool watch, but it's also overpowering. Can we take a look at something maybe a little bit more expressly elegant? You better believe we can. And from FPJORN, we have an outstanding example. This watch was made from 2004 to 2005, and while it's often mistaken as part of the ruthenium series, the truth is the Octa Zodiac came after those. Those were all made in 99 examples, and there were only 5 different models made as rutheniums. This has the aesthetic of the ruthenium with the coating on the dial, the 40mm platinum case, but you can see that it's a very different type of complication than any of the 5 rutheniums, in that it has a Zodiac calendar, and on the reverse side side, you can see this watch, which was one of the very last of the brass movement Bjorns. It has conventional rhodium plate on the brass bridges as opposed to the ruthenium coating of the ruthenium series. This is a very cool piece, and it was something that Bjorn did because he loved the romance of the Zodiac calendar, and it's true, it dominates the dial and gives this watch an immense presence. It actually looks a lot larger than 40, even though, rest assured, it is a 40. Now, the watch includes a quickset system for the calendar, and it also includes a quickset system for the Zodiac chapter ring. And so the two things adjust in sync, and the index for the Zodiac is right up there at 12. And you can see that it helps to align the Zodiac symbol with the actual month. So it works on both of those levels, both as a Zodiac and as a month date. Now, we have a 120-hour automatic winding power reserve, or at least that's the headline number. Reality is it'll run for more like 160 hours, but 120 hours is the chronometric power reserve. Now, the watch is on a Jean Rousseau strap, which is basically exactly what FPJORN would provide because Jean Rousseau makes the FPJORN factory straps. We decided to give the watch a cooler grayscale look that works nicely with the dial. As you can see, the tones of the strap are the tones of the dial. It's a wonderful sort of nubuck suede texture top and bottom, and you can see we have gator skin on both sides, just as you would find on a Bjorn strap. Here we have a matching pin buckle, and you can see, in addition to the brass movement, and this really was the end of the line when these things ended production in 2006, other than some special editions that would come out later. This was the last of the regular production of brass calibers, as mid-2004 was the end for series-produced watches, and then these limited edition watches that started during the brass era finished with brass, even though, again, the last of these were made, and this was one of the very last made in 2006. You can also see it's a French-made Eleanor case, as we've got the Eleanor maker's mark, and then the double-stamped eagle, the hallmark of French precious metal, and then we've got the Swiss St. Bernard head, and that's because these cases, before mid-2008, Bjorn cases were made outside of Paris by Eleanor, a case supplier that had served him from his earliest days of pocket watchmaking. He later bought up Eleanor, brought it to Geneva, and renamed it Boîtier de Genève. And a lot of the folks who worked at Eleanor still work at Boîtier. They take a little shuttle that Bjorn provides back to France each day. This watch is substantial for a Bjorn from the period. 38 millimeters was more common in the early days. This watch at 40 feels a lot more contemporary, but like most of the early Bjorn watches, it's quite thin in profile, even given the complexity of the calendar that is included. So if you love the Zodiac, if you love the look, if you love the rarity of a discontinued collectible, distinctively styled and limited edition FPJORN, this is the way to go. Let's see if you guys can guess this next one. I'm going to start with the Lume Shot. I imagine if you're a Patek Philippe diehard, you already know. For everyone else, you're looking at a new for 2017 model, already discontinued in this dial color, and it is the, oops, what's going on there? Oh, this is the Patek Philippe 5320G. All right, we're back. Let there be light. This is one of my favorite Patek Philippe Perpetual calendars. It heavily references the company's own history while managing to be a standalone star. So externally, you can see that this double-stepped case profile with triple-tiered tapered lugs, that actually comes, as far as I can tell, from the vintage reference 2405. Now, the watch is white gold and 40 millimeters in diameter. This cream-colored dial was discontinued in 2022 for a salmon dial, but I actually think that the original execution here is more charismatic. The case is fantastic. The crystal might be even better. As you can see, it is one of the most dramatically boxed sapphires that Patek Philippe has ever used. It is effectively evocative of a vintage plexiglass. And then we get to the dial, and this is a recreation of the charismatic and rare reference 1591, of which two were made. So we have this combination of vertically arrayed Arabic numerals. We have an aperture day and month, a pointer-style date with coaxial moon phase, and then these syringe-style hands. And what really set the 1591 apart from something like a 1526 Perpetual is that it had center seconds, and that's what we have right here. Now, the hands as well as the numerals are solid white gold. And then the dial is a rich hand-finished multi-layer cream lacquer. This is one of the coolest looking watches that Patek launched in the 2010s, and you can see the attention to detail right down to the countersink of the crown so it doesn't stick out unduly. Flip it all over, you can see it's also a fairly rare center rotor Patek Philippe Perpetual calendar. So here we got the caliber 324. It's got a lot of fine qualities, being handsomely decorated. Automatic winding with a 45-hour power reserve, 6-position adjusted, free sprung with a Gyromax style balance, and an anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. And Patek attests that this watch will run to no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day, which is a bold boast, as most companies in horlogerie are simply embarrassed to make any claims about accuracy because they know they can't meet them. Patek has a lot more confidence. Now, the watch is 40 millimeters, but it doesn't quite wear that size, partly because the lugs are so spare and tapered. The watch feels more like a 38 or a 39, so smaller wrists down to perhaps even 13.5 centimeters circumference are welcome to play here. This could definitely be a unisex option. You can see that it effectively slides underneath the cuff because the case flank is so dramatically sloped, any sleeve will ramp up and over the side. I also like the use of aperture-style displays. I find it's a little bit easier to read Patek's aperture dials than it is to read something like this 5327 that has a bunch of coaxial sub-registers that are a little bit difficult to register, pun intended, the further you get away. This is a lot more straightforward. I adore this piece, and it comes with a matching full folding clasp. Zoom out a little bit. Let's see what's up next. We got a lot of fun stuff on the agenda today. Since we're on a perpetual calendar kick, let's continue with one from IWC. Now, since 2003, most of the IWC Portuguese perpetual calendars have been 44 millimeters. What's fascinating about the 5022 is it was made in a 42 millimeter format. So this 42 millimeter watch, it's actually 42.3 millimeters in white gold, was made from 2006 through 2010 approximately, and it's just a much more wearable watch than a 44. Now, it's not any thinner, but it's not quite as broad across the wrist, and oftentimes with a Portuguese, what happens is that the lug-to-lug span winds up being so broad that it overhangs the edge of your wrist, and that's really the no-go zone. So let's take a look at this watch on a 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and you can see that it wears nicely. This is something I could wear. Now, I think that if your wrist is any smaller than mine, you're going to struggle, but I would also say that the 44 millimeter Portuguese or Perpetuals are too big for a wrist of my size. So while the lugs are right out to the edge here, they're not over the edge, and that's important. All in white gold. It's got a satisfying heft and weight to it, and you can also see that it's nicely made, as Portuguesers tend to be. By the way, some folks ask, is it Portuguese or Portugueser? It's actually either one. Portugueser is how you would say Portuguese in German, which is the language of Schaffhausen, where IWC exists. Remember, IWC is in the northeast of the country. That's German Switzerland. They would say Portugueser, but Portuguese would be how we, in the English-speaking world, would describe a watch that is inspired by the original Portuguese vendors of IWC to Portugal from the 1930s, and that is where the design comes from. So the original elements of that original 325 reference from 1939 include the blended integrated lugs, the leaf-style hands, the vertically arrayed Arabic numerals, and the small seconds, albeit on this watch the small seconds is over at 9. Now, we have a couple of registers on this dial that tell us everything we need to know about the time. We have hours and minutes at center, small seconds over at 9 o'clock, and yes, we do have hacking. We have coaxial, a power reserve indicator, 7 days, by the way, and a pointer-style date. We have a month, and then we have the day. We also have a moon phase display. We have the year, the decade, the century, and the millennium. And one of the fun features of this watch, let me just make sure I'm out of the date change danger zone, is that it features the IWC mechanically linked Kurt Klaus programmed perpetual calendar. So as I start making adjustments, notice how the day, the date, the moon phase, and eventually the month and the years will move in sync. So every combination of day, date, month, moon phase, and year, and month, well, guess what? It's a real one. You can't get these things out of sync. Simply making the adjustments, it will always stay correctly synchronized, and it will always allow you to simply turn the crown a number of clicks equal to the number of days the watch has been stopped. Very easy to use. Flip it all over. The movement is immense, and it is 38.2 millimeters in diameter, making it one of the world's largest automatics. You can see it features ceramic pawls on the peloton bidirectional winding system. This is the IWC Albert Peloton system that was designed in the 40s, implemented in the 50s. A pre-magic lever, a pawl-based bidirectional system that was known for its efficiency and its durability. We've also got a chronometer-style 5-position adjustment on the movement with an overcoil hairspring and a free-sprung balance. These are impressive refinements. We have the 51613 movement. It's based on the old 5000 architecture that first debuted back in 2000, but there have been a lot of changes, including the free-sprung architecture, some elements of the finish, and the higher beat rate. This is 21.6. The original 5000 was 18K. A really cool watch that is strapped for the weight of the timepiece. And you can see here we have a full white gold deployant clasp to hold it in place. If you're going to buy an IWC, just one IWC, you're going to buy one of the iconic ones. The iconic IWC model lines, the twin pillars, or the Portuguese and the Pilot. And personally, I'm not much of an aviation fan. For me, it's got to be the Portuguese. And if it's going to be a Portuguese Perpetual, the 42 is definitely this one that I would buy for myself. This is the reference 5022-18, just for your reference. All right. Let's go back to the Lume Shot, and hopefully my lights don't stall again. You guys probably already know what this is. It's a hell of a lot easier to call in the dark than something like the Patek Philippe. But remember, not only is it fully loomed, it is a regulator. Not only is it a regulator with separate hours, minutes, and seconds, but it has a date. It has a thermometer. It has a runner. It is the Resonance Type 3. Now, the original Resonance Type 3 came out in 2013. This is the 2015 revision that includes a little thermometer, so you know that the operating watch of the range is still safely within the parameters. This will tell you when it's either too cold or too hot to wear the watch, though I understand in practice the warming effect of the wrist becomes the cooling effect of the wrist in really hot weather. So for practical purposes, with the expansion bellows that exists inside the watch, the roughly 37 milliliters of oil present under the dial rarely will get so hot or so cold that you couldn't wear the watch. It's really just there for fun, offering visual balance and another element of complexity and visual interest. Now, I mentioned this is a regulator, and truthfully it is. Here's the hour, here's the minutes, here's the runner. Now, the runner lets you know the watch is, quote, running, but it's not a seconds hand. It takes 6 minutes for the runner to make a full circuit, so it lets you know your watch is running, but it's not a seconds display. Now, counterbalancing visually, the thermometer is a day-of-the-week indicator. Yes, it's not just a regulator, it's a date. And so I can see right here, let's turn back to the hour on the hour. By the way, the ROCS, or the Resonance Orbital Convex System, is a movement on top of a movement that's made entirely in-house. So you can see we have these 7 arcs. 2 of them are surrounded by orange. That's Saturday and Sunday. Now, it moves in a clockwise direction. So you can see right before the 2 orange arcs, we have Friday. So we're looking at Friday, and if you're wondering if this is 5 a.m. or 5 p.m., you can see that the hand is in the first half of the arc, so you were looking at 5 a.m. You can tell using the date system that you're looking at the morning. You can also see we have this radial date indicator. The index is at 6 o'clock, and so you can see right now we're looking at Friday the 4th. Now, take note from any angle, because the oil and the sapphire have the same index of refraction. You can read the watch from any angle and there's no distortion. The watch is 44 millimeters. The case is sliver thin in grade 5 titanium that's blackened, but you'd barely notice it, as we have a combination of sapphire over the back, sapphire over the front. You can wind the watch using the case back, though, as you'll note, there is a rotor in there that will actually wind the watch in its own right. It's an ETA 2824 base with the Resonance Orbital Convex System on the top, which is an immensely complex system, including the thermometer, the oil, the regulator display, the day, the date, all the lume, and an expansion bellows system so that the oil can heat up and cool down. Now, you throw the watch on the wrist, you might be thinking, Tim, 44 is way too large. Well, 44 is normally too large for me too, but Resonance, founded by industrial designer Benoit Mintens, he is all about ergonomics. That's why the company's logo is a hand. It's meant to be friendly, approachable, easily wearable. So you can see it wears a little bit like a wire lug Rodimir. Easy, comfortable, with the lugs barely there, just there to sling the strap around your wrist. So even if your wrist is 14 centimeters in circumference, again, mine is 16, you can be able to wear this really well. It is an absolute ball to be able to set this watch and impress your friends. There is nothing more spectacular, short of maybe a minute repeater or a grande sonnerie, than a Resonance dial, a truly new idea in time telling in an industry where that's rare. We're going to finish on a high note with one of my favorites, a brand that is criminally underrated, Laurent Ferrier. Guys, we really need to spread the word. Ferrier watches are as beautiful as Patek and give Romain Gaultier and the Valet du Jeu as a whole a run for its finishing money. This is a 2016 model year 10-piece limited edition. It's the Gallet Traveler USA. And it is an American market, limited edition of 10 pieces in white gold, 41 millimeters in diameter. It has that gallet or pebble style smoothed case, like a pebble that's been flattened and smoothed in a stream over eons. You can see vintage inspired. It has a large onion style unbranded crown, and then a spectacular cloisonné and grand faux enamel dial. Take a look at it. Admittedly, a geocentric view of the world as predicated by an American perspective. You could see we have North America here, and then not just different colors of vitreous glass paint, but different weights of the paint. So the paint will be layered on thick where it needs to be dark, less so where it needs to be light. We also have the cloison, or gold wires used to create the boundaries of the land masses. So those boundaries are bent and created by hand, and then they're filled manually by the artist using that glass-based paint, and then in an oven fired up to 20 times at 800 degrees Celsius. This is a precious metal dial base made of gold, on top of which the glass has been applied and the cloisons have been formed, and it is a work of art in its own right. Now we have a little pusher adjuster on the flank, inspired by Laurent Ferrier's years at Patek Philippe, one of his original employers, so it has that classic Patek travel time fingernail notch. If you've ever wondered what those notches are for, it's for that, so you can more easily operate the pusher adjuster, and you can see that this controls my local time. This controls my date, allowing me to jump this date forward and backwards, depending on which direction I am traveling. Now, what you see over at 9 o'clock is actually a second time zone in a 24-hour format. See how it changes as I make these adjustments? We've got assegai, or spear-style hands made of white gold at center, with white gold indices outboard. This really gives the Patek Philippe 5231 a run for its money. Flip it over, and it leaves the Patek in the dust. This caliber is developed in conjunction with La Fabrique du Temps, is a spectacular feat of finishing, but also engineering, as we've got a pawl-based micro-rotor winding system that is absolutely silent. It's on a jeweled staff with ratchets that keep it absolutely silent and seamless. You feel no rocking, you hear no clicking or rattling on the wrist. You can see that we've got a full black polished half bridge for the balance. Note how the steel component's been both black polished on its top and skeletonized. And then let's get closer. You could see we have 4 sharp inward angles, finished in steel where bevels meet in a sharp crease. A lot of Geneva seal watches feature not even one of these sharp inward creases, whereas here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even 6 and 7. And then the bevels are a mile wide. Again, this is Romain Gaultier level stuff. It is beautifully executed. These are hand-finished bevels. You can see that that bridge for the rotor has been black polished on its top and beveled on its edge. The stripes are extraordinarily broad, and there's an incredible color gradient from one side to the other. These are abrasive wheel stripes, not the stamped kind. Engine turning in several sizes on the base plate, all screw heads black polished and chamfered. And I should mention, we have a overcoil hairspring, a free sprung balance adjusted in 6 positions, not the chronometer standard of 5. All this with a 72 to 80 hour automatic winding power reserve. Take a look. All of the jewel sinks have been internally beveled. That's called a partridge eye treatment. And then, possibly the most impressive part, we have these 2 Liga-formed nickel phosphorus escape wheels. There is no Swiss lever in this watch. It is a double direct impulse, natural style escapement as envisioned by Breguet and implemented in 1802. Breguet's was ambitious, but it didn't work well. The Ferrier system, benefiting from the production capabilities and computer design virtuosity of La Fabrique du Temps, Mr. Barbacini and Navas making the system work. So designed on a computer and created using LIGA, a sort of galvanic lithography. These nickel phosphorus wheels have the tolerances that were not possible in Breguet's era. The only element of the movement that's not created by hand or finished by hand, those two wheels directly impulse the balance. That is, there's no lever between the escape wheel and the balance. The wheels impulse the balance directly in either of its two directions of travel, clockwise or counterclockwise, so that the wheels, the escapement, never have to reverse the inertia. The hairspring does all that. This watch is groaning with artistic and engineering over-refinement. It is truly the definition of over-engineered, and I don't know that I've ever used that term for a watch not made in Germany, but this one has earned it. We'll throw it on my wrist. By the way, guys, full deployant clasp here, an unusual feature on a Ferrier watch, as they usually include pin buckles. It's a large timepiece, make no mistake, but if your wrist is 15 centimeters circumference or larger, you're going to love the way this fits. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details of anything you see on this program.